All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the online networking and knowledge session of the Dutch Data Center Association. We're very happy that you're all joining us today and looking forward to sharing our insights today. My name is Judith de Lange. I'm a policy officer at the Dutch Data Center Association and will be hosting this session for today, for this morning. What's happening today? We will be releasing our annual market study of the Dutch data center market. We call that our State of the Dutch Data Centers 2020 report. Next to a short overview of the research, and it's also an update on where we stand as Dutch data centers. We will also talk about the competitive position of the Amsterdam hub in comparison to Frankfurt, London, Paris, and Dublin. The other data hubs in Europe, the so-called flap markets, or flap D markets actually. So it's both a deep insight into the Dutch market, but also with lots of interest or lots of details on how the Netherlands is doing compared to the other European data center hubs. And of course, we look into recent developments such as the Amsterdam region area, but also, of course, the COVID-19 crisis. So all these aspects will be dealt with today. The State of the Dutch Data Centers 2020, so our report, it's a freely available market study with contributions from CBRE and from PB7. The researchers, both involved in this study, will both be present here today. So you can also direct your questions to them. On the right side here on the screen, you see the program. The first hour of today will be dedicated to 2 presentations and a Q&A session with the experts. Then from 11 onwards, we have a meeting tool that provides you with plenty of network possibilities. You have the opportunity to virtually meet the other around 450 participants of this event. So lots of interest in our content today. And many of you have done so already. So there are already many meetings scheduled. In case you haven't done so, you can set up a profile, browse through the list, and send out meeting invites. There's a link here on the screen, but you have also received some emails with to ask you to set up a profile. All right, we will start the program with a presentation by Stijn Grove, our Managing Director of the Dutch Data Center Association and of the Digital Gateway to Europe organization. His around 20 minutes presentation will be followed by an update from Mitul Patel, Head of the EMEA Data Center Research, Advisory and Transaction Services at CBRE. Also around 15 minutes, then we end this program with a Q&A session. Peter Vermeulen, Principal Analyst at PB7 Research, will join Stijn and Mitul during a questions and answer panel session. As mentioned before, if you have any questions throughout the presentations, please don't hesitate to drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get these answered at the end. So we're not gonna, so we'll definitely save your questions for later, and then we'll try to answer as many as possible. So this is around 1 hour of sessions, and we're looking forward to your comments as well. I will be now giving the floor to Stijn Grove, our Managing Director and the first presenter of today. He will share some insights on the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Judith. Thank you very much, Judith, for the introduction. Welcome everybody at this event. Very happy that we have so much attendees today. As Judith already said, we're going to give you an overview on the Dutch market and our market research that we're presenting today. The DDA is the National Trade Association for Data Centers in the Netherlands. We are established in 2014, voice of the industry, promoting the industry, and we have almost 91% of all data center operators in the Netherlands now in our organization. Next to that, we have around 60+ data center suppliers, important suppliers of our industry in our organization. We have grown over the last few years up till 5 FTE, and we do a lot of policy work in the Netherlands and abroad. Our participants range from pure Dutch players to international well-known players, and we have around 35 participants. And over 60 suppliers in this industry, and a special notice to our main partners, Socomec, Legrand, Evershed, Sutherland, and Stultz. Our publication is downloadable today via our website, so please download this document. It is for free. The publication this year has the title Go Digital, Act Sustainable, and I will, in this presentation, I will show a little bit more about why we have chosen this title, but also about the recent developments in the Dutch data center market, especially also the Metro Region Amsterdam update. We have in our publication also a comparison of the FLAP markets and the FLAP-D markets, and an update on our policy, energy sustainability, education, employment, and digital economy and gateway. Go Digital, Act Sustainable. We see that the energy transition and the digital transformation meet in digitization. And you see that data centers are, although they have grown tremendously, we see that the efficiency is enormous. Cloud applications and by migrating to a data center, outsourcing to a data center, saves energy. And this is a real example how new developments in the digital world actually, if you look at on a global perspective, are stabilizing energy growth for this industry. We see a tremendous and robust digital infrastructure, especially with the recent developments of COVID-19. In our report, you see that we were able to continue our economy. In the Netherlands, over 55% of all office workers worked from home, and actually the transition from when COVID-19 happened towards a online economy actually went very smooth. Although we have seen a double-digit growth in bandwidth, the infrastructure was sound and kept on going without any hesitation. What was also seen, and this is also seen in our research that we published today, that while everybody started working from home, the actual energy use only raised with 1 to 4%, while we see that there were tremendous drops in energy as a whole in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we saw 10% decrease in energy use, and we saw 5 megatons of less emissions, while the data centers only went up with 1 to 4%. So here you can see that working from home is actually benefiting the energy use. And we hope that this also becomes structural, that people start working 1 to 2 days or more from home, because that will actually save the economy and the society a lot of energy. If you look at the Dutch market, you see that we have seen steady growth. Of the last couple of years, we have seen, if you look at specifically the growth of actual data centers, we've seen a steady growth of 10% for the last couple of years. And the trends that we've seen for the last couple of years have been continuing. So we see a lot of outsourcing. We see some consolidation internationally domestic. We have seen that smaller data centers, very small data centers are being closed, and the bigger data centers are getting bigger. And we have grown now up to 378,000 square meters of data center white space and around 200 data center facilities in the Netherlands. Our expectations are still very good. So we expect stable growth, even though with this crisis, the digital economy will continue to go to move forward. And so we don't see a major impact and a change in the growth numbers that we're seeing. We have also asked all our members what are our biggest challenges of the organizations. And in the latest research that we did last couple of years, we saw that also the finding new customers is still the #1 challenge, which is always a good challenge for any industry, but also getting enough people, but also keeping in track on national and European legislation. This industry, a fairly new industry, is, of course, has been under the radar for many years, but with the growth, the steady growth, we have also seen more and more attention by governments on this industry, which is also a natural trend. But that is something that we have to, as an industry association, also manage, because we want to continue our growth, especially now as an industry which is really, apart from other industries, really showing very good growth numbers. So that is something that is a key focus for our members, for our participants, but also therefore a key focus for our organization. A lot of questions have been asked for the Amsterdam update, and we have been busy for the last couple of years, for the last year on this subject. On the 11th of July 2019, a moratorium was announced by the municipalities of Amsterdam and Haarlemmermeer, the two blue municipalities in this, or the green and the light blue municipalities in this map. This caused a construction pause, or a pause for new licenses for construction. So existing licenses could continue and are continuing, but for any new projects, this caused a pause. The last year, we have been in very constructive and positive talks with the municipality of Amsterdam and Haarlemmermeer, and we're happy to announce we're very close to new policies that will continue this industry's growth. And the new industries will focus more on sustainability, will also focus on creating a new cluster in the neighborhood of the MRA, the Metro Region Amsterdam, and will allow us to smoothly make that transition. So we are very positive about the way forward, and we expect that new policies will be in place soon. This industry is growing very hard, and we have many challenges also on the power side, on the distribution side, on the growth side. But I think that with the example that we're now showing the world, we are also ahead with tackling these issues and really going for growth together with the municipalities and the sector, so that we can really make a stable investment climate for any technical company that wants to invest in the Data Hub Amsterdam and the Netherlands. We have also in this report added a comparison report, which is a benchmark study of the Netherlands as a data center location for multi-tenant data centers, hyperscale locations, and co-location customers. And we have compared that to the FLAP-D, in the FLAP-D market. So Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin are compared. We're focusing on geography, on energy, proximity to markets, the connectivity side, costs, and other factors like labor, regulatory climate, and quality of life. And we see that the Netherlands is performing really well on these. Only very recently, this weekend, another large hyperscale data center was announced, 160 hectares of land just on the outskirts of the MRA region in Flevopolder. And there you can see that the special position of the Netherlands as a really a hyper connectivity hub together with a hyperscale hub is really unique in Europe. And if you look at also the size of the Netherlands, if you look at from the radius from Amsterdam, every location is reached within 1.5 hours, 150 kilometers. So it's very, it's a very small country with lots of data center infrastructure and lots of connectivity infrastructure. So basically, when people talk about Amsterdam from outside the Netherlands and looking at the relative distances, you can really compare the whole Netherlands as being Amsterdam, from Groningen to Maastricht, from Rotterdam to the east of the Netherlands in Almelo. So there you see a real, it's a real Amsterdam. And basically, when you're talking about Amsterdam, you're basically talking about the Netherlands. If you look at the comparisons, one of the key issues is also the electricity prices, and therefore there we score very good. So that's also one of the reasons why this is a hyperscale and a connectivity country. Like I said, the domestic data centers per radius, it's a very dense data center country. We have many data centers within 50 kilometer radius. Every province in the Netherlands has a lot of data centers. Amsterdam had a solid year last year, so we've seen again very solid take-up. But we also see that there has been some impact. We have to be honest and fairly fair about that in terms of the construction pulse. But this is likely to start up again. The take-up in the flat market surpassed the 200 megawatts mark, so digitization is continuing and is not to be stopped for many years. So we see developments all over the European market, but we also see challenges over the market. So therefore, I think it's also very good that we see so many other associations in whole of Europe being created and now coming up to speed. And that is something also very important for us, that we try to work as good as possible with the other associations to really grow Europe as a very solid digital market, because the digital economy starts with the foundation, and data centers are the key part in the foundations of the digital economy and the digital society. Now some updates on our key focus areas. We as DDA have three main key focus areas: energy sustainability, education and employment, and digital economy and data hub. Let's start with the energy and sustainability. You see that now the contracted data center power in the Netherlands is 1,626 megawatts, according to our research, of which 52% is multi-tenant. This is the capacity of the contracted power. The actual power use is a bit lower. It's about, if you see the load in data center, the average load is around 35% in the Netherlands. And we are actively involved in accelerating the power infrastructure, distribution infrastructure. That is one of the key issues. The concentration of data centers gives a lot of pressure on the distribution infrastructure. That is, there we are no different than any other country in the world. And this is something where you need to work together with distribution companies to create longer reports on how the market will grow. And we're very happy that we have a very good relationship with the high voltage and the mid voltage distribution networks in the Netherlands. Also, one key part in the Netherlands is that we focus a lot on residual heat. The power that is used, that is used in data centers can be used for heating up urban areas, but also greenhouses. And that is something where we've seen already a lot of examples currently operational in the Netherlands. One of the key parts is, or key examples is the Science Park student housing, only recently announced. The 600 student homes are being expanded with another 700 apartments. So that's a really good announcement, but also the high-tech campus in Eindhoven is fully heated by residual heat. We want to continue that, and at this moment we are really still struggling with old legislation, which isn't allowing us to move even quicker forward. But this is a real key green energy source if you look at the circular economy, and this is something that we're really focusing on. That is also something which we report on in our yearly conference, and that will be taking place on the 8th of October. If you look at, there's a lot of focus on the energy consumption and on sustainability of data centers. And one of the key also findings is that we're very close in going for 100% green energy in the Metro Amsterdam region. In the whole of the Netherlands, we're at 86% using green energy. And I think there we are one of the key, one of the examples in this industry and are the front runners in using green energy. And with also a lot of involvement now in PPAs and actually being part in building new wind parks, this is quite positive to see that there's so much involvement in this industry. But also education employment for many data centers, this is, and suppliers, this is the key challenge, getting enough people. We have over 10,000 people working directly and indirectly around data centers. And if you look at the induced effects around close to 13,000 people, finding good technical and IT skilled data center staff is the #1 challenge. And we're very positive that we also see this year a new education initiative really starting in the Netherlands to really step up getting more trained personnel in the Netherlands. There's a huge challenge here, but there's also a huge opportunity for people to work in this industry. And we see that this is the 13,000 people is of course only the data center layer, but this foundation, this digital foundation, actually is driving a lot of job growth. And the future is digital, so more and more jobs will need digital savvy people. And so that is a real focus that there needs to be in any country and also in the Netherlands. If you look at the digital economy side of things, we contribute 1.5 billion euros directly to the Dutch GDP. And so that's a real impact only from this industry. But if you look at the industry as a whole, it's much bigger. So the internet economy, the digital economy has a total added value of 242 billion. And the growth of our digital economy means that we're seeing more and more relation to the economy and the digital layers below it. Without a good digital infrastructure, and especially what happened with COVID-19 is a great example. If you want to continue your economy, if you want to grow your economy, you need a very strong digital infrastructure, digital foundation. And that digital foundation is also is an area that needs continuous support, needs continuous maintenance. And therefore, we focus a lot on also the subsea cable landing points, new subsea cables for the Netherlands to continue the international connectivity that is great in the Netherlands. But if we want to continue as a key data hub, that needs investment, and that needs also legislative work where we are working in a great cooperation with our governments. Also, of course, in January, we had our biggest Kickstart Europe event yet. Over 1,100 people attended, and which was a tremendous success. But for next year, of course, we're monitoring very closely on how the COVID-19 situation is evolving. So far, we're still ongoing with the event, but we're monitoring, and we hope that you will keep monitoring our website with that. If there is any news, we will let you know, and we will do that also via regular updates.
All right, thank you, Stijn, for your presentation. Let me put on, yes, thank you. Again, if there's any questions coming from the audience, then please don't hesitate to reach out via the Q&A box. We'll have time after Mitul's presentation for a Q&A session, so for some questions from the audience. Please don't hesitate to reach out already now, and then we'll get to your questions at the end. Coming up next is Mitul Patel from CBRE. I'll give the floor to you. Yes, hi, good morning, and the floor is yours. There you go, thanks.
Hi, Julia, thanks very much, appreciate it. Remind me to send you a better photo for next year's discussion. So to just update people on just how we're seeing things, just in the sector, and it's sort of a current state of view, I suppose. We've looked at the sector very closely since COVID-19, and we're tracking the trends as we always have done, and sort of impact of COVID. And so I'll talk to some of those. I don't have a slide deck, but I just wanted to talk through 3 sections really. Firstly, the sector overview. Secondly, a view on take-up, and then thirdly, just a view on supply and development. So if I start with the sector overview, now going into COVID, the sector was performing extremely well, better than ever. 200 megawatts of take-up across the 4 flat markets in 2019 alone, which was a new record, and 24% market growth in the year as well, which is incredible. You know, just imagine the office space or the residential houses in a big city growing by 24% in a single year. It really was quite exceptional growth. And it's easy to forget that prior to 2016, no year had ever seen above 77 megawatts of take-up. It's the impact of cloud being responsible for 80% of all take-up was really seen last year more than ever. And then in the current environment as well, data centers are one of the best protected in the current downturn. They're playing an incredibly crucial role in keeping the world online and keeping the world functioning. The fundamentals of being at home for work and both personal life. I mean, the digital infrastructure we have in place is more important than ever. conference calls, video games, television streaming, connecting with friends and family would not have been possible, just a few years ago without the data center industry developing as fast as it has and being able to provide these functions for us. Given that the function of data centers in the current environment has been so strong, the business environment and the leasing environment has still been really good as well. There's not been a slowdown in the appetite from the large cloud hyperscale companies or the big tech companies. You can imagine their services are being used more than ever. The impact of Zoom and Teams and all of those functions that we're using much more while we're working and playing from home than we would in our everyday lives mean that those companies are more hungry for data center capacity than ever. And positively, leases are still closing. You might have seen yesterday the news of a 27 megawatt pre-lease in the Frankfurt market was announced. Those discussions would have been ongoing during the COVID-19 pandemic with all the restrictions in place. So from a leasing point of view, that's very positive. The hyperscale companies, the big companies, are still able to procure the capacity they need to. That might be slightly different for enterprise companies and traditional corporates and facilities that are reliant on those customers. Many of those businesses are struggling. They've not been able to open for sort of 2 to 3 months now. I think it's easy to forget that many businesses, are small businesses. They might be running on a month-to-month balance sheet and things are very tough. So in those situations, we're aware that some companies have asked for either slower expansions or rent-free periods on their leases. Conversely, some companies have brought forward lease renewals to give them security of tenure in these uncertain times. And then so when we look at the overall impact of COVID and what the new normal might look like, I think the ability to work and live digitally has largely been successful during this period. And if there ever needed to be a test case for, could cloud computing and could digital infrastructure sustain a country for a period of time, this has been it. So going forward, as we settle into some form of new normal, we are likely to use digital services much more than we did prior to COVID-19. That means that data center capacity and services will be more in demand. We'll need to build more data centers and develop more data centers across Europe to house the demand that ultimately leads to take up from these companies. And we may, on the flip side, also see an accelerated move towards hybrid or cloud IT services from traditional enterprise companies. It's entirely possible that some of these companies have realized during the downturn that managing data center infrastructure is not what they need to be spending their time on when they've got core business issues to deal with. So we may see an accelerated move towards hybrid IT. If I just turn to the take-up environment, we've just finished our sort of Q1 2020 statistics, in which we recorded 26 megawatts of take-up for the quarter. That's lower than the 50 megawatt par you would need to get to 200 megawatts a year, but we're still extremely positive that this year will be a very fruitful year. The last 12 months on a rolling basis have seen 186 megawatts of take-up, so markets are performing well overall. And the downturn in Q1, which will be a temporary blip, was just because the cloud providers are hungry looking for new capacity. They've procured new capacity, but a lot of those facilities won't be ready until the rest of the year. So we're still expecting 200 megawatts of take-up for the full year across black markets. On top of the 26 megawatts leased in Q1, we've recorded nearly 140 megawatts of capacity, which is either pre-let or under option. We expect all of that to be triggered and come into the statistics this year. That means that really we only need 40 megawatts of new transactions from today to secure a 200 megawatt year, which should be entirely possible. And again, we'll maintain the 80% cloud enterprise balance. It could even be above 80% for cloud companies, given their larger ticket sizes. And so just on that, the way the hyperscale companies and the cloud companies are now leasing co-location capacity is changing. They are looking for larger ticket sizes. They've now gone past the stage where they just need double digits, but they're looking for 20 megawatts plus on day one now, committed. And they will ramp that down either by utilizing a third or a half of capacity on day one, and then procuring the other two phases as a lease goes on. And we're seeing that as much more commonplace now. That's leading to many more single-let buildings. The hyperscales will swallow anything that is given to them in key areas these days. And data center facilities in Europe are still relatively small compared to the United States. So we're still developing facilities at 25, 30 megawatts, and that's a big facility in Europe. But that is just about enough for the hyperscale companies. So they will procure full buildings in one go now. To put that into numbers, we expect to see 9 facilities being let as single tenant facilities in 2020 across the flat markets. That's compared to 4 last year and just a handful in all of the years previous. The hyperscale companies are now procuring much more capacity across Europe. We expect to see many other markets in play this year. Cities such as Milan, Madrid, Zurich and Warsaw have already seen public announcements from the cloud companies that they are key markets for those companies, and they will spend billions of dollars procuring IT infrastructure in those cities and other cities as well. So it's a really exciting time, not just for the flat D markets, but also for other markets in Europe, which are seeing huge interest from those companies. And then just finally, a word on the supply and development. We expect to see 250 megawatts plus of new development in the flat markets this year. In fact, Frankfurt over the next 2 years will see the most development of any flat market. Some markets, Frankfurt is a very good example again, have very few facilities with any real vacancy. So the development of these sites is actually crucial to house new end user requirements. In cities like Amsterdam and London, you do have existing facilities today with 10 megawatts plus of vacancy, and they can work really well for these companies. In Frankfurt, that doesn't exist. We're also seeing a bit of a change in the way that sites are procured. We're seeing an increase in the hyperscale companies because of their buying power now, looking to move more towards a powered shell or a triple N type facility. This is bringing different types of companies into play. Companies like Panattoni, Goodman, Prologis, all kind of real estate logistics developers are now able to position their sites and business parks for data center use. And they might not also be in what would traditionally be called prime areas. And then data centers on the sort of typical co-location side are now facing real competition from companies that are being formed purely to seal hyperscale commitments. Companies such as Yonder, who are trying to bridge the gap between co-location and self-build. So it's very difficult now for co-location companies to be competitive, and we're seeing them try different things, whether it's bringing a lower cost of capital for data center developments, which we partner with GRC on hyperscale platform, or offer solutions such as powered shell and triple net offerings to give some of the upside of the operations away. We're also seeing, as a result of the incredible development, still ongoing constraints around data centers. We've seen a real effect of power availability in key areas of Frankfurt and Amsterdam, as well as West London. In Sossenheim and Schiphol today, it is very difficult to secure new power for data center development. So companies are going to have to either get quite creative or look to new areas within those markets. Land options in areas such as West London are really hard to come by, and we're now seeing land going for over £6 million an acre with data centre consent and unique conditions within that marketplace. And so again, the sector has to either come up with creative solutions if companies want to get sites in real prime areas, or they will have to find sites in slightly less traditional areas and make that work. Stein mentioned the moratorium in Amsterdam, which is coming to a resolution, which is great. And you also mentioned the issues around staffing and teams for data centers. You know, the more data centers we build, the more people, the more construction companies, the more operations staff we need. And that's difficult because data centers are such a niche area. And then finally, just to touch on the construction and supply chain. We've been asked this quite a lot, actually. How is construction affected by COVID-19? And the answer, in our view, having spoken to quite a few of the operators building these big data centers, is that yes, construction has slowed down. Restrictions such as social distancing has meant that time has been lost in the build program so far. However, operators are really confident that ultimately facilities will be delivered on time, and any time that has been lost to date will be made up. Given that so many facilities are now pre-let and customer commitments are dependent on the delivery of these new facilities, it's no longer just nice to have your facility developed on time. Your customer contract depends on it. And then on the supply chain front, supply chain has been managed pretty well so far, it would seem. You know, it's unknown if there are further restrictions or a second spike of the virus, how things might change. But to date, again, people have been able to build the data centers that they've needed to. So overall, the sector is really strong and the outlook is very positive. Most economic indicators show that the sector is growing more than other asset classes. Data centers enable the digital world. They're crucial in our current environment, and the asset class is therefore well placed and well served to continue growing. So that's everything from me. Thanks.
Thanks, me too, and great to have you ending on a positive note. That's always good to see, good to end with. Thanks again, very insightful. I'll get let me see. I'll get the other panelists in. We're now gonna start with a short panel session. I'll ask Stijn Gove to join us again as well, and Peter Vermeulen. Here they are. There's already some questions in the Q&A box. Please don't hesitate to reach out again and via the chat box and ask some questions. Oh no. All right. Look, yeah, Peter is joining us as well. Since we haven't heard your voice, I'll start with a short introduction. Peter, you have been researching the markets of IT, cloud, SaaS, security, IoT, and data centers for an impressive number of years now. First with IDC and since 2011 with PB7 Research. For the state of the Dutch data centers, you did a comparative research on the Netherlands as an attractive location. Stijn also mentioned it in his presentation, but for the co-location data centers for hyperscale and for co-location customers, since these three have such different wishes, you compared the three of them separately. And then you compared the Netherlands or more Amsterdam with Frankfurt, London, Paris, and the Dublin markets. Can you tell us a bit on what fields did the Netherlands come out best, and what aspects did the Netherlands score less than its competitors?
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, well, what we've let me just take one step back. So what we've done. So we looked. So first we tried to find out. So what's really important when you're looking for a location. So we looked at a lot of survey material and figured out so what's important, and then we also tried to weigh those indicators. So how important is it to different types of data centers, and based on that we sort of build a model that or a benchmark that showed where the Netherlands scored better or not so good compared to other countries. So what we found out first of all is that one of the reasons why the Netherlands or Amsterdam is doing so well is that it scores well across all categories. So whether you look at geography or energy or proximity to markets, the Netherlands scores very well sort of in all major categories. But we also see that in some of those aspects that it outperforms the other countries quite clearly. So we see that in terms of energy. So we see that in terms of pricing, that the Netherlands is relatively cheap. It's a bit France is close, but it's the other countries, Germany, UK, Ireland, they're much more expensive, and also the quality of the network, the quality of the power is quite good. So it's the best in the market. And so that's one of the big things that we see that the Netherlands is doing, where the Netherlands is sort of outperforming. And the other one is really the telecoms infrastructure. So we see, so the Amsterdam Internet Exchange is almost just as big as the one in Frankfurt, the DECIX. But those are both of them are by far the biggest ones in Europe. We see that in terms of fiber adoption, that the Netherlands is well ahead of all the other countries. So those are the real. So that's really where the Netherlands stands out. So excellent connectivity infrastructure. Those are and that's basically why at least in the benchmark, in the way that we configured it, that the Netherlands scores very well and scores better than the other countries. There were also a few weak spots. So not on the sort of the big categories as a whole, but when you look, for example, at the Netherlands as a country for green energy production, that we score actually pretty poor compared to other countries. That has nothing to do with the data centers itself, because they all, well, we've seen in Stijn's presentation how much they are basically buying green power, but as a production company, we're still pretty gray. So that's one of the things where the Netherlands scores worst compared to the other countries. National disaster risk is also one of the things where you think, well, since half of the Netherlands is sort of below sea level, it brings a bit of risks, but you also see when you look at the research about it, that when you talk about preparedness, that there's no other country who is prepared or better prepared to deal with the challenges that the sea brings, for example. So there's so it's not a huge risk there, but it's just, well, Frankfurt, London, Dublin, and Paris, they're just a bit safer, or even safer than the Netherlands. So that's sort of the second point where you see that the Netherlands scores sort of the lowest. And then a third point where the Netherlands doesn't score the lowest but scores fourth is in terms of is actually in terms of submarine cables. So there are a number of transatlantic cables that land in the Netherlands. There are quite a number of, or also a couple of cables that are sort of between countries within Europe. But actually, you are seeing that sort of in France there's more dynamic. Well, UK and Ireland always have been much have a lot more landing points, since they are sort of literally closer to the US. But what you have seen over the last couple of years is that, and I think Stijn pointed at that actually, that it is time for the Netherlands also to look at investing more in submarine cables. So it's not that the Netherlands scores very bad there, but you see that a lot of the other countries just score better. So
Excellent.
Those are the key points.
Thanks. And in addition to that, Stijn mentioned the Amsterdam MRA moratorium, so the construction pause.
Mm-hmm.
Beside the MRA region, do you see other regions in the Netherlands which could be new data center growth regions within the Netherlands, within its borders?
Well, there are, well, you see that there are just outside of Amsterdam. Well, you already see it in the north of Amsterdam, so around Middenmeer, where sort of a hyperscale campus has emerged over the past couple of years. So and of course we also see some opportunities in Groningen, in the Eemshaven, with Google, and where there's excellent connectivity with a marine cable landing point. But also there's a lot of room, for example, in Flevoland. So actually, where we see that there's now this new hyperscale expected to land in Zeewolde, for example. And apart from that, I mean, even when you look at, for example, South so around Rotterdam, etc., it's not really that far from Amsterdam, where the real connectivity hub is. So you can also look at, so there are also opportunities there. But even that just looking at the international market, because we also have a lot of data centers focused on more on the domestic market. So you see a very interesting concentration around Eindhoven, for example, and in Groningen, and also in the east of the Netherlands. So you see data centers opportunities across the country as a whole, actually.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks. Stijn, Grove, the Amsterdam moratorium of last year is of course a very important topic for the Dutch Data Center Association. Can you explain a bit more on the path forward? Also, when you expect restrictions or the energy limitations in the area will be solved, for example?
Well, we expect to be having a new policies at the end of this month. And these policies are sort of focused on making it possible for our industry to continue growth, at least for until 2030. And in the meantime, we are also focusing on creating a new cluster in which a new hyperconnectivity cluster where the industry can continue to grow, what you also see in other areas in the world. So this moment we have the Science Park cluster, the Southeast cluster, the Schiphol cluster, and some additional clusters like the West cluster from Haarlem to Sloterdijk. We're trying to focus also on creating a new hyperconnectivity cluster where there is room to grow. We do that with the municipalities, and I think at this moment, like I said, very constructive and positive talks to also create a long-term view. Everybody knows that yeah, we need digitization, we need the foundation for it, we need data centers. So, but yeah, the big growth that we're seeing as an industry is also a challenge to find the right places to align it with investments in infrastructure distribution, electricity distribution infrastructure, and that is something that we want to really take on together. So create a clear view where we're going, and to match that also with the focus that the municipalities have. And if you're looking at the Amsterdam municipality in Haarlemmermeer, it's also, of course, there's a lot of focus on the energy transition. And also a room for energy transition. So the investment in energy distribution was already an issue there. So we try to see how we can help also with the residual heat, and how we can help also with, for instance, building our own substations to relieve the existing grid.
Yes, interesting. Me too. Since there's restrictions or growing pains, so to say, in Amsterdam, but also in the other European hubs, you also mentioned in your presentation some other emerging hubs. What about the Nordics? Any action moving towards that area? What do you see there happening?
Yeah, absolutely. The Nordics is a really interesting market. You know, it is one of the biggest data center markets in Europe, given the fact that there are so many hyperscale self-built data centers. And it seems like the big tech companies and the big hyperscale companies will still grow in the region. You know, we've seen public announcements of many new data center schemes in the Nordics. You know, Facebook's expansions, new data center schemes in Denmark. When we look at the markets and we judge it from a co-location perspective, we do see the market growing. We don't probably at this time see it growing as fast as places like Madrid and Milan and Zurich, which are in play right now, because the tech companies have so much of their own infrastructure in the region. But certainly they've started to announce that the Nordic regions is an active cloud region for them. It's not just an area that they keep kind of back-end computing. It is very important for their business purposes. So I do think that that region will come alive at some point in time, and probably to the turn of last year, there was a lot of noise around the Nordics. And I think some of that has come to fruition. You know, there are a lot of good components about that region, whether it's the huge access of land, the power, the very cost-effective green power. And the local authorities are pretty data center friendly. And we saw that with Sweden cutting its energy taxes for data center use a couple of years ago. So it's well primed, and we probably do see it emerging as a co-location hub in the future.
Thanks. And Marseille, there's also a submarine landing moving fast. Do you see that changing? The flat markets, but where does Marseille come in from that point perspective?
Yeah, Marseille is really interesting. You know, in most of the big European markets, you typically have one strong data center hub. There are a couple of markets, you know, Switzerland is a little bit different, where Geneva and Zurich are both very strong, and Germany, obviously being federal, has strong hubs. You know, in France, Paris has been the main market, but Interaction are the company that has made a huge success out of their Marseille hub. And we've had companies talk to us for many years about Marseille, but no, everyone has seemed to investigate it and not quite made a move. And whether that's because they found it difficult, or whether they've decided actually, Interaction has this kind of lockdown and there might not be room. We certainly think, as Marseille proves a great gateway to Africa, as that continent becomes more, starts to use more devices, its cloud adoption goes up, more people have access to smartphones and smart technology. Marseille will prove a real critical hub for that region. So I don't expect it to challenge Paris, for example, as being the second co-location hub in France in sort of any time soon. But it's certainly proved, and to your point around the submarine cables, it's going to prove a really important gateway. It's one of those markets where at the moment, there isn't place for maybe 10 big co-location providers. But certainly the people that are there have made a big success of it. So there's no reason why, as Africa starts to use cloud adoption much more, that shouldn't be a really important hub.
Thanks. Stijn, of course, the topic of the report is go sustainable, or is sustainable. Sustainability is an important topic. There's of course a lot of attention to the energy consumption of data centers. There's some new numbers also coming in from the report. Can you elaborate a bit on data center energy consumption and what you see going forward in the future?
Yeah, energy consumption has been always a main concern for data centers, and that's also because the energy consumption is the main operational cost for data centers. So if you can limit your operational cost, if you can limit the amount of energy used, that makes your company perform better. So there's a lot of focus there, and if you look at the statistics from the International Energy Agency and the recent research in Science magazine, you see that over the last 10 years, the global energy use of data centers has been stable, while we have been more and more using digital technologies. If you look at the Netherlands, the energy use, we see that there is 1,600 megawatts of capacity being being built. The actual energy being used is far less. So there's a load of 35%, and you see that because many data centers build their capacity on peak power, so a maximum power, and each customer wants maximum power, but the actual day-to-day use is much lower. It's around 35% of that max power. So there's a lot of misconceptions about that part. What you also see is that the reason why the energy use was very stable is that we're more and more concentrating the use of energy in data centers. So and that's sometimes very strange to comprehend, because data centers becoming bigger and bigger, and they use more energy in that location, but they actually save energy for a country or a continent as a whole. And that is something that people don't take into account that well, that the fact that, for instance, Microsoft or Google have only a few data centers supporting the whole of EMEA, of course they will use more energy in that one specific country. But it saves energy for Europe, for EMEA as a whole, and that is something that that needs to be taken into account. And as of course a country which is very good in being a data hub, we have been a hub for transport for for over 1,000 years. That is something we also have to take into account. And so we're actually saving energy, but by concentrating that energy in certain areas.
And we're all using it, of course, so also via this application. Thanks. Peter, final question, because we're a bit over time, but I want to save room for one more question. So Peter, to you. So there's different technology trends, of course, coming the way of our industry. It's a very dynamic industry. We have, of course, the edge expecting. There's open compute technology that is still being talked about a lot. What technology trends do you see could potentially benefit the Dutch data center market?
Well, I think for now, the biggest trend that's out there, and it will continue to be out there for a long time, is the move towards cloud. So there's a lot of talk about edge, and of course that's something that's emerging. But first of all, well, you see that companies are moving workloads towards the cloud, and that brings a very interesting dynamic to the market. Because first of all, it opens up. Well, of course, there's cloud providers have a lot of demand, and they also want to be much closer to the customer as they have been before. So there are a lot of opportunities for wholesale data center co-location, for example, also for build-to-suit opportunities. Does it bring? So that's very interesting. But at the same time, you see that the enterprise data center sort of gets empty. So racks get empty because servers are shut down, they're moved to the cloud. And with those sort of that footprint that's sort of shrinking in an enterprise data center, you see that customers start to think, well, should I still invest in my data center or not? So they decide to move to co-location if there's a good co-location data center around, so for retail colo. So there's a lot of short-term retail colo opportunities that it brings next to, apart from the wholesale opportunity. But when customers start to move to the cloud and they start to move further to the cloud, they also start to move workloads that are now in co-location data centers to the cloud as well. So there are a lot of organizations that in the long term will probably reduce their co-location footprint. So that brings a very interesting dynamic. And you also see that there are a lot of data centers who try to focus on infrastructure as a service, for example, to compensate for some of the losses, or to make sure that they can still offer services to their customers. So cloud continues to be a very I think still for the next couple of years the key dynamic that will drive this market. And then of course you also have got edge indeed. So edge is very there are a lot of different sides to edge, because well, you've got core computing on the one hand, so the big cloud providers on the one hand, for example, or the enterprise data center, and then you've got on-device computing, and then anything in between, that's sort of the edge. So you have cloud providers that want to be closer to customers, who are putting a sort of a metro data center or a country data center or a regional data center over here. But then there are also a lot of new opportunities for let's say IoT business case use cases driven by 5G, and over the next couple of years, that will also change, probably change a bit what the market will look like over the next couple of years. And then there are indeed a lot of questions. What will that look like? So will there be an opportunity for the local or the sort of the real domestic data centers, or will new networks of sort of hyper local networks of micro data centers emerge? And the jury's still out on that. So those are the key things. And then, well, I can also talk half an hour about how AI is going to change it. And so there's a lot of things coming that will make sure that this transition to this digital world that is really going fast, and it will continue. So there will be opportunities around for a lot of organizations.
Good, thanks. Well, that's good to hear, and never a dull moment in the industry. So
Nope.
I guess that's good, and we'll keep on monitoring what will happen, and what other technologies will drive the future of the industry. Thank you very much, all of you. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing your insights. We haven't been able to answer all the Q&A questions. Of course, there were many in our inbox, but we'll get to that. And I'm sure if you pass the question onward to us, then we can ask Mitu and Peter to shine their lights on that as well. So we'll hope to answer all your questions. Thank you, Mitu Patel. Thank you, Peter Vermeulen. Thank you, Stijn Grove. Thank you for joining us. I'll switch over to the presentation again, because now we're going into the networking part of the event. We had a networking meeting tool available to plan meetings. A lot of you have already done so. The link is unfortunately not clickable, but I'm sure you have received many emails by now to join the meetings. 10-minute video calls, so you will be able to meet everyone. All right. Thank you for your attention. Again, if you've had any questions, you can email us, and you can download our report via the link. Thanks again for joining us, and until the next one. Thanks.